Lovers Daily, Thursday, January 20th. 2 more days until we get to the divisional weekend. 7 more games in total, and it's best when you start the show with a guest, and we've got Hitman in to help with all of your prop betting for this weekend. Almost all of the prices are up, less a couple running back props in Cincinnati, Tennessee, because of the obvious injuries looming, but 7 games to go. Are you a little bit bittersweet this time of year with NFL winding down and the offseason looming, or is it just trying to make the most before Super Bowl week where things get a little bit crazy?
No, honestly, I'm thrilled that the season's gonna end. And it's a grind, and it's really tough for people to understand how much work you're doing when you're working sometimes 14, 15-hour days on Sundays, especially. Mondays are always crazy. So, been made a lot of money, had a really good year, but I'm ready to get on the golf course and get in some warm weather and relax for a little bit and try to recharge the batteries for next season.
Don't you miss COVID news every single day? What happened to that? It just ended a week ago. We were dealing with it. The app was going nuts every day with alerts, and now we get to the playoffs, and it's like, this is how it used to be.
Yeah, well, the NBA still has a bunch of COVID news going on, and the NBA is sometimes 12, 13 game slates, a lot of information, who's playing and who's not. So I'm substituting the NFL COVID news for the NBA COVID news.
Always a grind. 4 games this weekend. Let's start Cincinnati, Tennessee. Curious how you're handling this from a prop perspective with basically the biggest story of the game. How much will Henry play impacting everything from that angle? But have you gone on anything here yet, or how are you looking at this?
Yeah, this game has had the most prop action for me personally this week. One of the numbers that's still out there, I think Julio Jones is probably in the 43.5, 44.5 range. You're going to hear me say this a lot because it's just how the prop market is, but I bet it at a slightly better number, and the market kind of got blown up a little bit, but I still think it's worth a bet. The common theme out there from people is that Julio's just completely dusted. And maybe health-wise, yeah, you're right. He can't hold up for an entire season. If it was season-long props, I'd be looking to play him under for sure. But for one game where I need him to stay healthy, he's still been a decent player this year. I mean, he has a 75 PFF grade. He has 14 yards per reception. He's 31st in the NFL in yards per route run. And last week, he received 9 targets. And he could have had an absolutely huge game if you go back and look. And you'll see that Tannehill missed him on some routes that he got a lot of separation. So I think that the biggest impact of Derrick Henry coming back and A.J. Brown being there is that Julio is going to get the softest coverage that he's probably gotten in his entire career. And, he could get a hamstring injury in the second quarter and I'll look like an absolute idiot. But he has actually played pretty well in the games that he's been healthy. So I think that this number just came in a little bit low, and I think that the 44.5 is probably still worth a bet, albeit a smaller bet than the 39s that were out there at open.
So be clear, it just because maybe it was missed at the start. You're on Julio Jones over. You bet it over 39.5, and you're still saying it's a bet. Would you bet it now at 45.5, where it's showing at the 4 books we have up here on the comparison?
It was a big bet for me at 39.5, and
Okay.
It's a smaller bet in the mid 40s, which it is now.
So you mentioned something about why you think he's going to receive soft coverage, and I actually completely agree with you when we're talking about Henry returning, and there's rumors he might get 15 touches as sort of like the ceiling. But what he does to Tannehill throwing downfield is actually as impactful as what he's doing running the football against what is a pretty beat-up Bengals defensive line. But do you think that angle applies elsewhere within some of these passing props more so than it might for rushing prop overs that people will scramble to take as soon as it's announced?
Yeah, the thing is, Tannehill's prop number did open pretty low in the mid 220s, and that kind of got blown up pretty early. So I think that the market's kind of been betting the place with him, but you're completely right. I saw a stat earlier. I forgot who posted it, but they said that just 11% of Tannehill's dropbacks this season happened when Henry, Julio, and AJ Brown were all on the field, and Tannehill averaged 9.5 yards per attempt
It was
when they were
crazy
all on
high.
the
Yep.
field. Yeah, and I know we talked a lot about how we were so anti-Titans in the middle towards the back of this year. But we got to remember that they were playing without Henry, without AJ Brown was in and out of the lineup. Julio was in and out of the lineup. This is really the first time in a while that we're going to see them at full strength. So it's definitely, I think, a huge plus for some Tannehill props that they opened up pretty low just because they were basing it off his year-long stats, which were without these guys.
Anything on the other side for the Bengals?
Yeah, Tyler Boyd under 4 catches, I think you could still find at
Oh,
minus
okay.
115 at some shops. I think 3.5s plus 130, plus 135.
Yep.
I played him under. It really just comes down to the fact that the usage he's getting, he's gotten 5 targets per game over the last 7 games. So when you're saying that he needs to catch 4 or 5 passes and he's averaging 5 targets a game over a pretty decent sample size, it's just going to be hard for him, in my opinion. And yes, the Bengals are throwing a lot more. Their 3 highest situation neutral pass rate games have been their last 3 games with starters. But the Titans don't allow much play volume because of the offense they run, which is really a slow-paced offense. And teams are getting off the second most plays against the Titans this year. So it's probably going to take volume for Boyd to get there, and he just hasn't been receiving the targets. So I played him under, and I would also look at some Joe Mixon unders. But with him, I think you wait. I think you don't bet it now. You're probably going to see some of the public bet his props over. So at the current market, 60, I think you wait and hope that it goes up a little bit by the time we get closer to game time. But that's a guy that I'm potentially looking at under on all as well.
Fantastic stuff. So Julio Jones overs, Tyler Boyd unders, San Francisco Green Bay night game on Saturday. Interesting matchup where there's some uncertainty about Garoppolo, although it's looking a little bit more positive than it was on Monday, Tuesday, now this morning. How are you looking at this game where there's some pretty distinct advantages on both sides against the opposing defense?
You know, it's my favorite side of the week. I like San Francisco plus 6. I'll be honest.
You're leading up to something big.
I really liked it because I agree, and I think you just posted that you like the Niners as well. And I really liked it because I agree that the matchup is just really good for the Niners. And I can't get out of my head what the Shanahan offenses have done to them in the past. And this Green Bay run defense is not much better than it's been in years past. I think I saw Suma posted these numbers. They're 30th in EPA in run defense, 30th in success rate, and 28th in DVOA. And they faced such a weak schedule this year. The only top 5 run offense that they faced was Cleveland, and they got absolutely shredded by them. And plus, if you look in December when they played Cleveland, they were 7-point favorites in that game. When they were going to play Minnesota in week 17, before Cousins got COVID, they were 6.5-point favorites.
Yep.
This line is 6 right now, and San Francisco is clearly better than those 2 teams. And it's only about a half point to a point difference in the line. So I think that all the values on San Francisco, I honestly liked it a lot, but I think that this Jimmy G injury is a little bit worse than we might be led on to believe. And I think it's good enough that he's going to play, but I think he's clearly not 100%. So I like my position on San Francisco, but I will give the caveat that I like it a little bit less than I did earlier in the week.
Prop-wise, how are you handling anything, if adjusting at all?
Haven't done much with this game.
Okay.
The prop lines kind of came out a little bit later on this game. I know that Devontae Adams, you can maybe an over would be worth a look. I haven't fully broke it down, but I know that historically he's absolutely torched this 49ers defense, whether it's been DeMeco Ryans coordinating it or Robert Salah. He's absolutely destroyed them. So potentially a look to Adams. And maybe Jimmy G. Again, I haven't fully broke this one down, but maybe you look at a Jimmy G under. And if your handicap is that the Niners are going to win this game, in all likelihood, it's probably going to be with their ground game. and they're going to probably manage Jimmy G. So, of course, you run the risk that Green Bay blows them out and Jimmy G's throwing a lot from behind. But if you really like San Francisco, the odds are they're probably going to get out to an early lead in this game, and their ground game's going to control the game from that point onwards. So potentially a Jimmy G look, but like I said, haven't done my full work on this one yet.
Rams Buccaneers. Last week you had some Tampa Bay unders. Are you looking at the same thing this week against a difficult Rams pass rush that they're going to probably have to maneuver around without their starting right tackle, Tristan Wirfs?
Not really. A lot of that we played in the Philly game was one that the weather was going to be bad in that game, and it was about 25, 30 mile per hour wind gusts. And two was the fact that Tampa could easily get up in that game against an Eagles offense that I did not anticipate was going to threaten them very much. So really no prop unders. To be honest, I was maybe looking at a Gronk over in this game. Okay. Again, haven't personally bet it yet, but you would think that the two safeties being out for the Rams, this is the spot that it could really impact them, especially if we see a decent amount of Jalen Ramsey on Mike Evans. I know that he hasn't traveled much this season, but he didn't travel much last season. And in the playoffs, he traveled a lot with Adams. So maybe they make the adjustment and have him travel with Evans, but maybe some Gronk overs. You know, this is a tough game because I'm kind of a little Joe Public with, I'm a little nervous about fading Brady in this playoff spot because he's just, I mean, he's a lifetime 60% against a spread quarterback. And in the playoffs, he seems to play his best. I know it's square, but it's just a reality of his long-term record. But I will say that the Rams, I think matchup-wise, match up very well. Stafford has done really well against the blitz. McVay has done really well against Bowles this year. He did really well against them, and even last year, Jared Goff had a huge game against Bowles' defense. And we know the thing, the book on Brady is get interior pressure, and Aaron Donald can get that, and Von Miller on the edge. We have the offensive line injuries for them, so I will say that I think that the matchup has me strongly leaning towards the Rams. If you could get a 3 in this spot.
I'm with you on the Rams and leaning that way. And I was sitting this morning having a coffee, and I'm like, I'm going to have bets against Aaron Rodgers at home and Tom Brady at home, backing Matthew Stafford and Jimmy Garoppolo. I was like, is this really the spot that I want to be in going into divisional weekend? So I feel that sentiment for sure. Sunday night game.
One thing real quick too, Adam, is that I don't know if Stafford's 100% healthy. We heard that report the last Green Bay game about 2 months ago that he wasn't fully healthy. And we haven't really heard much about it since, but he's been a little gun shy, and he's been throwing a lot of picks. And he I don't know if he's looked 100% to me personally. Still a good quarterback, don't get me wrong, but that's something to keep note of as well.
Shockingly high run rate for a McVay offense the last few weeks. Like, even, I know they were in control against Arizona, but they were like 23, 24 carries to 8 or 9 passes in the first half. You don't see that from McVay and the Rams ever. So, interesting spot there. Sunday nighter with a few minutes left here. Buffalo, Kansas City, huge total 54.5 and trending higher. Where are you looking here?
So this game, the Allen rushing yards came out in the mid 40s, and it was just one that you knew was going to get absolutely blasted because of what he's done recently. But maybe you could look at a live Allen over if the game script does go get to the point where Buffalo's down. You could see Allen running because he has had a propensity to run a lot more in the playoffs, and recently he's been running a lot more. You know, for the game, I'm looking Chiefs in this one. It's been one that we've talked about a little bit.
Yep.
I'm not ready to fire because some little birdies have said that maybe this line gets a little bit lower and that you get a better price on the Chiefs.
I've heard the same thing as well.
Yeah, there we go. So, you know, I think that you wait on it if you like Kansas City. But that's the only side I can look in this game for me personally. All the talk about the Chiefs offense not being what they used to be. They're first in the NFL in EPA per play. They're first in success rate. They're first in the amount of drives they've had to punt. They've punted the least in the percentage of drives. I mean, it's a great offense still. I guess we
The
just got
best.
so spoiled by how good they were 2 years ago, where they were so explosive. But it's still a great offense, and I think at the absolute least, you're going to say that these two teams are equal, and if that's the case, maybe a 2.5 for Kansas City for home field advantage for this one. So, I have Kansas City. I'm closer to 3 on this one. So, for me, haven't bet anything yet. Just going to monitor the market, but the Chiefs are the side that I'm looking at in this one.
The Chiefs, their offense is as good as it has been, but it just looks really, really different because of how defenses are approaching them and what the defenses are forcing them into doing. And it's weird that doesn't entirely translate over. It's like we almost view it as a struggle, despite it still being like extremely easy and efficient. On that Allen rushing prop over, I remember texting you the first game they played the Pats in the win game. So that was like early December-ish. And Allen was opening like mid low 20s. and now we're seeing it, like you said, open mid 40s and getting bet up. In these high leverage spots, playoff games, like there's just such a willingness for Dable to design these QB runs and for him to hold on to the football. Like how high is like pregame? I think we're getting to the point where it's too high, but like what number, when you mentioned like in play, are you considering, or what kind of like game state are you looking for that would potentially get you in on that?
Well, there's no specific number I can point to because it's all an algorithm with the live betting. So it's hard for me to say. It depends on how many yards he has at the time. That's what the number is going to be. If he has 20 yards in the first quarter and they're down 14-0, the line's going to be in the 760s, probably, I would guess. But
Better if they're leading or trailing.
If they're leading, if they're trailing, excuse me. But it's one of those things that, again, it's an algorithm, and you just have to see how much his rushing yards would get adjusted. But you would have to think that if they are trailing in the game, this is not a team that, I know they've been running a little bit more recently, but that's been with a lot of leads against teams. This is a team that if they get down, you're probably going to see a pretty high pass rate, and you're probably going to see the ball in Josh Allen's hands a lot. So maybe the number's gotten a little out of control pregame, but maybe you get a live opportunity if you get to the point where Buffalo is throwing from behind every single play.
Awesome. So to just wrap up for everybody, you like Julio Jones over, felt really good about that one. It was a big bet for you, high 30s, still a bet mid 40s. Tyler Boyd receptions under. In San Francisco, Green Bay, you like the 49ers plus the 6, but you're a little bit concerned potentially about Garoppolo, as we all are. In Rams, Tampa, not a lot, but you like Gronkowski over. That one's in the low 60s. And then Sunday Night Football, you're just waiting to see what the line ultimately looks at, and maybe an Allen rushing yards over in play.
Sounds that you
What a
recap
card.
perfect.
What a card. Fantastic.
And I'm sure as there's more lines open up and more stuff comes out, the market gets bet certain ways. I'm sure I'll have a ton more props, but early in the week, we have limited options, and the market tends to, as I've said, the market tends to get blown up pretty quickly.
And for anybody that wants to keep up with what you might be betting as that market gets blown up, at Hitman428 on Twitter, a must-follow account. You post fantastic stuff. As always, on behalf of everyone watching too and myself, appreciate you sparing 20 minutes here with us on a Thursday morning.
Thanks, Adam. Talk to you again soon.
Chat soon. Fantastic stuff as always from the Hitman himself. One of the best prop bettors that there is when it comes to the NFL. Widely respected, and like you said, when he clicks, the screen moves, and he's a guy that has just the way he looks at games and breaks them down is as good as anybody from the prop perspective. So some interesting bets there to get in now, and some interesting bets to consider making as the week progresses as well. Waiting a couple minutes here. We got John Sheeran coming in any moment now. Have a couple questions about what transpired over at FanDuel during the weekend. There was some pretty high-profile wagers made that had an interesting decision ultimately around it. And then we also have Alan Berg coming in from WinBet, 12:45 p.m. So we'll be with him in about 25 minutes, get his perspective on what he's seeing with the final 8 teams in the league, who stands out, and then what the weekend is looking like over at WinBet. So fantastic to be able to talk to two of the biggest bookmakers for two of the biggest books in the U.S. Before I bring in John, as we're just waiting a couple minutes here for him, I wanted to mention that I did bet San Francisco +6. That was the first bet that I have in the bet thread this week. And similar to what Hitman was saying, there is some concern about Garoppolo. He and Shanahan both gave a press conference after practice yesterday, and it was interesting to hear how different their responses were with the shoulders. But we have John in here now, so we'll get some thoughts because I know he has an opinion on the 49ers too. John, appreciate you sparing a few minutes with us here this Thursday. Before I get to the Niners, I know we have an audience of bettors that watch the show, but also at the site that enjoy the recreational side of betting and like to participate in promotions, like to participate in a lot of bets that offer some fun. You guys have an ambassador for the brand that creates as much fun around betting as anybody else does, but the fun kind of turned into a bit of an interesting situation with the McAfee same game parlay where it came down to Scotty Miller. There was a back and forth on what the prop actually was, maybe a bit of a misread from the excitement on their part, but a ton of people got in. It was about 50-some thousand were participating in the parlay. Obviously a huge liability for you guys. How did this decision unfold to ultimately refund some of those wagers? And what was your involvement with how that shook down?
Yeah, look, first of all, I'd say I agree with you entirely about, Pat and the ambassador and the relationship that we have with him. I think he's, built an incredible brand. We're proud to have him, be a key partner of the FanDuel brand. So from that perspective, a lot of value in obviously what Pat has generated and the benefit that has to FanDuel. So I think first and foremost, the prop itself was incredibly exciting, obviously, to get that many people motivated, mobilized to be able to bet an SGP in the manner that they did was really exciting. Yeah. So from our perspective, liability, not really a concern. It was obviously in excess of $10 million, which is a lot of money. But, considering, the finances, the investment in marketing, I think that spend would have actually been a good thing if we had lost that prop. And then I think just around the decision to refund, there wasn't really necessarily any miscommunication on either side. I think it was just how close it actually came. The debate as to whether or not he was on the 9-yard line when he was downed, or whether it was 8 yards is called. Obviously, our rules and some of the regulators enforce us to settle in accordance with the official rule, the official site, the NFL.com. So that's what we're forced to do, and we think that's the right thing to do. But to come a half a yard short was pretty close to agony for a lot of bettors. Obviously, Pat was sweating it real time. And we just felt like where we can, it was a good opportunity for us to recognize how close everybody came and give them another shot at it for free.
Is there any worry from an outside perspective I would have potentially like the precedent that this sets where there might be other people betting that come close to winning a big bet that matters a lot financially for them? And they may be looking at it and saying, well, why isn't there a refund on this? Everyone else was on it too. It was a popular bet on a primetime football game. By like refunding something this public, is there any worry from the FanDuel side on what that might ultimately tell other bettors or imply to when it comes to those close calls?
I think it's a very fair point to make. I think it's very situational. Historically, our brands under the Flutter umbrella in Europe and Australia have always tried to be on the better side, particularly when it comes to what we call justice refunds, whether it's a bad play on the field or a really unlucky situation that's completely out of a bettor's control. We feel like in those scenarios, we would like to be able to do more of that in the US market. I think the nature of state-by-state regulation makes that really difficult. So I think, where possible, we will look to try and have bettors backs, as strange as that might sound to a US market. But we definitely would look to try and do more of it. But I fully acknowledge your point that, the deciding factor ultimately lies with us, and sometimes some bettors will probably feel aggrieved.
Well, I appreciate the transparency on that, but it was fascinating for us to watch internally as you're seeing these numbers go up, and it's 30, 40, 50, 60,000 people on one bet, and how close that came. It was just a pretty unique circumstance. It was great to get your perspective and honesty there on how you guys were handling that. As Monday morning we saw it, and it was like, whoa, what's going on here? So I appreciate that a ton. Something else that you guys had going on over the weekend, you were posting the advanced lines for potential matchups for the divisional weekend as the wild card games were ending. Had a very interesting number with San Francisco, Green Bay. Last week you spoke about how you were kind of leaning the 49ers side in the Dallas game. How much action were those numbers that you guys had up generating relative to a regular game? And were you taking anything away from the money that came in on that and where it was ultimately maybe telling you the numbers were going to go?
Yeah, I think, look, first and foremost, I think we mentioned it last week, informational value in this is huge from our perspective. I want to try and get these lines up as early as we possibly can. The guys do an incredible job, shifting their focus away from a game that they're trading live to try and facilitate the ask that we have around getting these up as early as we can. And I think they're really valuable. I know you've noticed it, and I think a lot of our bettors as well are pretty interested in it. So from that perspective, keen to get up early, keen to back our opinion, as we mentioned last week as well. But yes, obviously, other shops are opening up different numbers and people are looking at the middle potentially opportunity, and that money tells us something. I think at core, we're pretty happy with our number on that game. Obviously, we posted the line before we kind of had the insight as to how serious Jimmy's shoulder was. And obviously before we had any real evidence of what Bosa and Warner's situation was likely to be. So from our perspective, the line has only moved to 6 because of that information and because of the public demand. We're seeing in the ratio of 4 and 5 to 1 money and tickets on both the spread and the money line for the Green Bay Packers, and that doesn't surprise us. I think we're pretty confident that all 3 of those players will be on the field. I'm a little more concerned about Bosa. I think he'll play, but probably more banged up than we're being led to believe, I think, is a concern on my end. And if that is the case, and we expect it to be, I expect us to be pretty aggressive to go after more money on the Green Bay Packers and move back towards that opening line that we had at 4.5 rather than where it sits at 6 now.
Interesting. So it really kind of comes down to probably today in the practice reports to get a better sense of what he's ultimately shaping up to be to determine where this number is going to move.
Yeah, I mean, I can't see. I don't know anybody that could make this number where it is now. It doesn't make any sense to anybody. We have these teams very, very closely, rated. Not a lot between them at all. On a neutral game, we'd struggle to separate them. And now we've got 6 points. And I get that they've had a bye. I get that it's Lambeau and it's going to be cold and potentially snowy. But I think everybody agrees that this is probably a good matchup if the Niners were healthy. A lot of similarities to the matchup last week in Dallas. And I see this line moving quickly once Bosa's ruled in. And yeah, like I said, we'll be aggressive with our number because we get it nowhere near where it is now.
Help me and everybody watching who's been confused by my confusion around the Tennessee Titans the last week and a half. How are you guys looking at them and what went into making this opener that you guys posted against the Bengals?
Yeah, I think we posted 2.5. We're at 3.5 right now. We don't really have a strong view on it. We found them pretty hard to value. The offense hasn't been together, I believe, since week 8 or week 9. So we're running a little bit on guesswork here as to what Henry's involvement will be. I think everyone's talking about 15 to 20 snaps. That seems realistic. Everyone saw the video of him in practice and it looks really good. But I think for us, the Titans are just difficult to evaluate. I see positives on both sides from a matchup perspective. So this is a game, probably the game that we have the least opinion on. We're really just sitting with a market consensus view, although it has gone through the 3 from where our initial ratings were valued. I think it's just a lower confidence in that number than in the San Francisco game, for example.
Henry was asked yesterday what's different about him pre-injury versus post-injury. And he said, well, now the only difference is I have a giant metal plate in my foot. So it's like, well, that doesn't sound great. But that was an interesting comment to get from him. Another game that you guys kind of differed in opinion on was the Tampa Bay LA game. How much of that movement initially went into reacting to the Monday night performance from LA, if any?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Look, our numbers are well above a field goal here on this game. It feels like a game that there's a big overreaction to the performance from the Rams on Monday night. It was an excellent game. I thought the call by McVay was superb. And we all know, I think Tampa Bay are a little bit more vulnerable this time around. The run defense hasn't been tested. I think they've dropped significantly, in my view, even against a kind of a pretty easy schedule. So we for sure see value in Tampa Bay right now with where the number is, and can't really explain why it's moved so much. So yeah, definitely interested in that line and where it goes, because a decent shade for us. We did see professional money at 3, so we respect that, which is why we are at the number we're at right now. But like I said, we're the other side of the field goal on this game, so probably lean Tampa Bay closer to kickoff.
Chance it comes off the 3 to 2.5?
I think there's a chance based on the professional money we saw taking minus 115 on plus 3. I think there's definitely a chance that we see that. I think, Wirfs, Jensen in particular, I think everybody's perception that, Ramsey might be able to shut down Evans and Gronk may be needed to chip off blocks. And then all of a sudden you're relying on Giovanni Bernard and, Cameron Brate, which they're good players, but they're not the weapons they've had historically. So it wouldn't surprise me to see it get to 2.5.
Sunday Night Football, big matchup, arguably the most exciting game of the week that people are looking forward to. Huge total that continues to get bet up. Help me here with this one too, because just like the first matchup, Tennessee-Cincinnati, this seems just awfully tight relative to how you might rate these teams.
Yeah, I think we don't actually have a ton between these two teams, mainly due to regression on the Chiefs this season. I think there's differing views as to what their offense really is and what that really means. I think, fundamentally, they're probably just more difficult to assess. The EPA, all the usual metrics that you would look at point to them being as dangerous or as efficient as they've been in the past. For me, it's just the defense. I think, in a game where they can't be as explosive and teams have figured them out how to play them defensively eventually after 2 years, I just think they're more difficult it's more difficult for them to overcome, stay with patience, short dump offs and stuff like that. So from our perspective, not a lot between them. We made this 2.5, allowing for home field in Arrowhead in the situation. At 1.5 now, I think you probably can't bet the Bills if you're thinking about value. But the matchup, I think, is interesting. I think last season's Bills performance, field goals, pretty conservative play calling was totally changed this year around. So if they stick with that, I think the Bills probably are very dangerous here. I think the over is interesting, though. You talk about a high total, 54.5. I think it'll only go up. I think it's difficult for anyone's models and numbers to get to this number just because the low sample size. I think we've got 9 games in the last 20 years in the postseason with a total over 54, and they're 8-1 to the over. So from that perspective, with the matchup, this seems to be a game where the over is probably scaring people, but I couldn't bet the under. I think from a matchup perspective, the Bills, both teams will have a lot of success offensively. And I think we've seen a change with the Bills in terms of how aggressive they are. They keep their, pedal to the metal. They've punted, I think, once in the last 4 games, which is pretty incredible.
So you kind of gave a little bit of a hint there to how you feel about it as maybe a better, but as a bookmaker, are you happy to have what I would assume to be more money on the over coming in at a number this big in the playoffs, or is it a little bit concerning?
I think that's a really good question, because my definite preference, I think we lean on our process, which is our number, and our number is only 53. So it's hard in this scenario. But like I said, we've only got a really small sample size. We all talk about these edge cases with high and low totals and how confident we can be in our numbers. I think you got to understand what is generating that number. And in this scenario, I don't think we've a big enough sample size to be sure that we can rely on it. So we do sit 54.5 right now. I know others have gone as high as 55. I think we're the only book not to go to 55 this week because of our number. But I've got doubts as to how relevant that is in this specific scenario.
Last question before we let you go. A week ago, you said that of all the numbers that you guys made, you felt that the Chiefs number was the most inflated. And the big difference from where your number was, it was a big point spread. The Bills obviously look very impressive against the Pats. the Chiefs, in my opinion, looked as impressive, but probably don't carry over that perception. When it comes to this game and now going the other way, the Chiefs seem to have gone from a team that was very sort of overinflated to now kind of on market or even slightly below, based on what you're saying, where Buffalo value's kind of gone. Is that all performance driven by Buffalo that sort of skewed the market to look at that way, or is it something else going on?
Yeah, I just think there's an inflated view on Buffalo this week because of what they did last week. We all know the numbers and the narrative behind what Josh Allen was able to produce, and the play calling from Brian Daboll was obviously an incredible masterpiece. I heard it called this week, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. I just think the whole narrative now, the whole market is, sold on the Bills, and the public money that we've seen on this game so far is 3 and 4 to 1 in the Buffalo Bills' favor. This is the first time we'll ever want the Chiefs in a postseason game. So for that reason, I can't see this line moving back towards Kansas City. And if anything, like I said, from a value perspective, if you value the number you're actually paying for your wager, you can't bet Buffalo in this spot, in my opinion. You got to wait and hope we get an even better number on the Chiefs and see how it
Fantastic
falls.
stuff. I really appreciate your time, and your insight's one of the best, and the transparency, like I said, is much appreciated from myself and all the bettors that are watching as well. So thanks for taking 20 minutes out of your afternoon, and we'll let you get back to it.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it.
Chat soon. Can't beat John. Fantastic stuff. I know I'm always happy about every guest that comes on, and I prop them up, but there's a reason they're coming on the show, and there's a reason I message out to him, and some of that insight that he was able to share and just that transparency level was fantastic too. And so to get that insight on the Chiefs, I think was interesting. He dropped it at the end. I was prying a little bit, and to see that it's now becoming that one-sided. When we did Halftime Live, David Sanchez and I, we were talking about how the Chiefs in that game, if you went box score to box score, and you were looking at what the Chiefs did to the Steelers in the first half and what the Bills did to the Patriots in the first half, you were looking at nearly identical numbers. The difference was that one play that Andy Reid decided to take Patrick Mahomes off the field, put in Mecole Hardman, and I think it was Darrell Williams. They run the option with those two. It's to fumble, and it goes for a touchdown the other way. If you take that away, not only are you looking at very close and identical scoreboards, but you're looking at essentially the same box score in both games, yet that Buffalo performance, there's something about that team that just stuck with bettors more. And now we're seeing a pretty unusual scenario where, like John said, it's the first time they've ever needed KC in the playoffs since they've established what they have across the United States at FanDuel. And so that's an interesting divide that seems to be driving the number the other way. But to hear what he had to say about the Buccaneers was very interesting. And again, another position taken on San Francisco. Third guest, we're just going back to back here. Fantastic stuff. Alan Berg from WinBet. We'll bring him in live on video, ready to go. Alan, how are you? Can you see me? Can you hear me? Stoic. We'll get him sorted out in just a minute. He means business, longtime bookmaker. They have a fantastic team of guys. Mo, Matt Lindemann, Alan, great group of guys over at WinBet, and they continue to expand to really good traders. A lot of focus on basketball too, so you get a lot of markets and a lot of different prices available over at WinBet. He's having a little bit of difficulty with the computer, so he's going to give it another try. But like I was saying with San Francisco before John jumped in, I made the bet, and as he was implying there, if Bosa gets announced in, this is a number that can only go one way. And so with it sitting at 6, it's kind of at the peak, and now it's really dependent on like any major setbacks today that I don't anticipate happening, ultimately taking this number any higher. And so I think we're kind of at the peak, and it's just a case where, like, how do you get to this number when you're valuing the two teams? And if you're going to try justify it for Green Bay, like, you really have to be overvaluing the bye, the home field, and the impact that these collective injuries are going to have on the Niners. And as bad as it looked early in the week, I think it's only trended in a positive direction for all three guys. And now it's almost like there's more questions than there is actual concerns with the injuries. And so, like John said, with Bosa being the big one, if he's in, this is certainly going the other way. And we've seen a general stance taken by a lot of the different books, which had opinions that you could see were pretty evident on San Francisco, not just coming into last week in the postseason, but through the latter, like almost 5 to 6 weeks of the regular season, where they were sort of shaded one way while the rest of the market was the other. And a lot of that's just driven by the divide that Jimmy Garoppolo creates. I'm trying to think of another player that's viewed in such contrasting lights between how just recreational bettors will look at him and then how professional bettors will look at him. And to me, that's where a lot of the value with San Francisco comes from. Because the truth is, the guy has done nothing but win in his time in San Francisco, but we focus on specific throws without looking at the big picture so often that it really skews the perception of what he is, but more importantly, what he does and offers to this offense. And I can't help but think we're seeing a case of that sort of fueled by the injury, not only to him, but the other guys really taking this number up too far away. Alan's still back and forth. We're going to try bring him in again, see if it works, see if he can hear. And if not, we might have to get Mo to run over and get the computer fired up on his end. Alan, can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah, I can hear you, man. Sorry about that.
Loud and clear. We're good to go. And you're 2 minutes early. So despite the issues, you were very punctual in arrival.
Yeah, I like to be on time if I can, man.
How's everything your way? What's going on at WinBet these days? You guys are expanding, business is booming. Well, give me the quick rundown of what's going on and what you guys are handling from a trading side.
Yeah, I mean, number one, I'm trying to get some sleep every now and then. It's been very busy. We're launching, probably Louisiana and New York very, very shortly as well, on top of the 7 states we're already operating in. We got a pretty great team here. The trading room's really killing it, and we're just really excited. Obviously, it's divisional playoff time, so it's going to be great.
What's it like having to deal with Matt and Mo every single day?
Well, I think the only reason I get any sleep is because I got them, because they do a great job, man. But they're definitely a fun group to have in a trading room for sure.
2 of the best. One more quick question after Brian. You guys have started doing a lot of media, giving an inside look. Is there ever thought to like putting up a picture or buying a plant or like anything within that trading room that's looking pretty bare and gray on all the walls?
Yeah, I think we're just happy to not have bars on the windows and things like that. But I'm sure at some point we'll try to get some memorabilia up or kind of class to join up a little bit. But we just got to actually move in our new building, and it's really awesome. And we got a really good setup in there. So WinBet's been taking care of us for sure.
I know a few of those trading rooms that do actually have bars on the windows in a few different countries. So that's a real thing out there. Can I pry for potential insight to New York and Louisiana launch dates as you get bombarded with Slack messages?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm totally getting crushed with Slack messages, and I can't even turn it off.
You're busy. It's all right.
Sorry, what was your question?
Can I pry for Louisiana and New York launch dates? Do you have any kind of timeline insight for when might?
No, it's
anything?
Pretty out of my hands.
No.
I'm just waiting to turn on the lines when they give it to me. But I would say we're getting close. That's about as best as I could tell you.
When you go into a new state, is obviously a state like New York is going to do crazy things for the handle. How do you approach that from a trading side with that influx of money?
I've always believed the number's the number. Like if the line's 8 and you have nobody sharp taking the +8, then you just keep staying there. And if if the public's just swarming you with -8 money, sometimes you're just going to need to beat them. And the biggest key I've found is that the guys who do this recreationally that want to have fun with it and stuff, I mean, they're going to keep playing. Sharp guys are tough to beat, man. If they're finding any type of plus EV, you just have to be really careful about when you're giving them a bet and to really make sure that you want those bets.
How quickly can you identify a player in a new market as being someone that potentially could do a little damage from the way that they bet?
sometimes it's super easy, and sometimes they're very crafty. And I think the biggest thing is you just have to be aware of like what the patterns are, and if there's any type of weird pattern change in certain accounts. Because at the end of the day, you have a sports betting account. We only see like a username that makes no sense to us, and we just have to track it and see what those bets are looking like.
So when one comes across that says B. Walters, you maybe don't believe it's originally Origin play.
Yeah, I think that would be a red flag to just
Might be a
up
giveaway.
the factor.
Yeah. Turning to NFL, 8 teams left. You have a opinion on any of the 8 that might stand out to you? Because I'm having a lot of trouble identifying who's best.
Yeah, I'm the same, man. I think I tweeted out like, I don't know, 8 weeks ago or 10 weeks ago that all these teams suck. And I was partially kidding, but I feel like there's no real standout. Everyone seems to have flaws, which kind of makes for the games to be pretty exciting. So I think there's, the benefit to that. But not honestly, like I wouldn't be surprised if there was a single Super Bowl matchup of these 8 teams that it wouldn't surprise me at all.
When it comes to this week, either from like your perspective as what you're seeing as a fan and betting as well, but also from maybe anything from your guys' side, taking the bets themselves, there's a lot of focus on injuries, a lot of focus on matchups, and it's weirdly in a way taken away a bit from the number. So obviously starting with Cincinnati, Tennessee, everyone's talking about Henry returning, the impact that that's going to have, the Bengals defensive line. What's your take here, and how have you sort of seen it be bet so far with you guys?
Yeah, so far we pretty much saw, some sharp money at plus 3.5, and then saw some sharp money at 3 on the Titans. So, we're getting decent two-way there. Obviously, the key number influences that. It's an interesting one. I think this game is probably the most torn one we are in the room. I think there's a couple guys who like Bengals, a couple guys who like Titans. I don't know. I get the feeling that I think we're maybe underrating this Titans team just a little bit because they haven't been healthy for so long that if they're able to get that, together and play it, near 100%, they could be underrated the rest of the way here.
It's so hard to figure out if this is a team that we saw week 1 to 8, or if it's like half of the team we saw weeks 9 to 18, and where does it fall in between? I completely stuck with this game side in total. Yep. Saturday Night Football, another one. You got Jimmy G with a shoulder, a hand, a thumb, everything else going on. There's people that think despite being born and raised in Illinois, he's going to struggle with cold because he's never seen it, which is interesting. But we're seeing this number, like it's hard to justify it being this high if everyone's healthy. But how much has the injury situation for San Francisco gone in to determining where this price is for you guys?
Yeah, I definitely think it's just, Jimmy G isn't exactly, Aaron Rodgers, obviously, and a hurt Jimmy G is even a little scarier. So I just think that they're essentially buying up the possible value that if he's, banged up, tries to play, doesn't play effectively, or doesn't play at all, then you're going to see the number move even more. So, sometimes I think they just buy into what they think the game has versus like the true matchup between the two teams.
How much shorter might this have been if we didn't have the injury concerns from the San Francisco side?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're settling in at like 4.5 probably if Jimmy G was at 100%. And obviously like Bosa and Warner, didn't get banged up in that game as well.
Buccaneers Rams is a game that bettors we've had on the show this week continue to go back and forth with. You guys are actually at 2.5, which is under the 3. Was that all just respected money, dropping that number down with the rest of the market at 3, or what went into that move?
Yeah, we got some sharp money on the Rams, and we also kind of leaned Rams in the room. So we just went with it. We stuck with this number. Really haven't had a ton of sharp guys coming back on Tampa. When we were flat, we got a 1 nibble, but that was basically it. So we feel pretty comfortable that we're at the right number at the moment.
Interesting. So a bit of a position taken there. The total wise, it continues to climb up slightly. What are you seeing on that over?
Early action, a little bit on the over. I know that a couple sharp books, I think took an under bet before I joined you on the air here. So I wouldn't be surprised if that number starts coming in a little bit.
Do you believe Tom Brady can make another run without some of these key weapons? Because I feel like we're giving him a bit of a pass, even against the Eagles. Like he's missing open receivers, maybe not entirely his fault, but just a lack of communication and some issues. Like where do you and the guys stand on Brady in general this playoff season?
I think we've all at least some point been burned by Tom Brady. So the last thing we're really trying to do is ever doubt that this guy can do anything in the NFL. But I definitely think you're right. I mean, there comes a point where there's just so many injuries around him. I mean, what can you do? You have to stay healthy this time of year to win the championship. And I think they still have enough in this NFC. I think the road game at Green Bay would be very difficult just because of those injuries. But again, I'm not a guy that's going to be hoping to have 90% of my handle on Tom Brady.
It's always a scary spot. So Bengals Titans split basically between the 3.5. The Packers just gone up because of the injuries, but arguably a little bit inflated there. The Rams continue to take professional money. That one's off to 3 for you guys. So significant movement there. Sunday Night Football, another game just like the first game of the week where I am absolutely stuck here. I'm guessing you guys got bet on the Bills. What do you make of this one?
Yeah, I think in my notes I have one of them says we're a Bills family, which I'm pretty confident was a Matoy reference. We've been high on the Bills all season. We think this is their moment, I think, to finally, grasp the AFC as the dominant team. That being said, I'm not thrilled at looking at Patrick Mahomes line -1.5 when the guy went to back-to-back Super Bowls. So it does make me a little nervous when I look at it on screen. But when you're getting backed up by sharp players, and we have that opinion as well, it makes me feel a little more comfortable. That said, if the Chiefs win by 3 touchdowns, I'll just go, yeah, figures.
So legitimately, sharp money, respected players are collectively going against Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, and Patrick Mahomes on divisional weekend. That's a real thing that's transpiring here.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to remember, too, these are the freaks that bet the Jags and the Jets on a pretty regular basis as well. So all that value in the number.
That's exactly it, because people are going to be watching this and saying, well, the Jags and the Jets, well, how did they do every week? They weren't winning. But at the end of this, like we were tweeting on the weekend, it just comes down to price, plain and simple.
Exactly.
Fantastic stuff. Alan, I appreciate you taking a few minutes away from the day. I know it's a busy week for you guys with college hoops and NBA and NFL playoffs and everything imaginable going on. So to spare 15 minutes, we're all very thankful for your time. And maybe we can convince you to come back on next week as well and share some conference championship insights.
Cool, man. Yeah, it's good to talk to you, Adam. Take care.
Likewise. Chat to you soon. Great stuff there from AB over at WinBet. Interesting to see them come off of the 3. I'll put it at that, because like I was saying, you see some of the quarterbacks and the way they're going, they have a very different opinion from what we were hearing from John on the FanDuel side, where he's like, we make this way bigger than a field goal. We're closer to 4.5 where they had it posted. Money's brought that one down. And then guys at WinBet, like you heard, they're saying, well, we're down at 2.5 because we respect that and we see the way it's going, and maybe this is it for Tom Brady. So although all of these places are operating in the same markets, doesn't always mean that they all agree and they all have the same prices. There's always going to be respect from any book if you're operating in a market where you have to be in line with what's going on. You can't be a book out there having Tampa Bay -4.5 because that's the number you believe in, while the rest of the market's over at 3. You have to respect that move and be in line with it. Otherwise, you're going to be upside down in how you're trying to book. And so there's definitely some of that. But around these key numbers, we see a bit of jockeying back and forth. And it really comes down to how you as a better value that information, what your number is, or if you're looking a step further, valuing who's behind these numbers, who's making them, and how they typically move them as well. So we have some interesting scenarios setting up in that regard this week. Fantastic stuff from Hitman. Fantastic stuff from John Sheeran. Fantastic stuff from Alan Berg. We're getting everyone back to it in just under an hour. Thank you very much for joining. Again, if you found any of the information in this show valuable, like, subscribe. You'll get the notifications. Tomorrow, Davis Sanchez will join me, partner on Halftime Live, to talk about everything going on in the Bills-KC match, get his opinion on some other games as well. Look at the X's and O's, which are so important this week, from a former professional football player, get his insight on the defensive side of the football, which should help out a lot of bettors make sense of some of these matchups. Have a fantastic Thursday. We'll talk to you